So the new prediction is the same as the old prediction, but for both fire signs. So we now predict both of them to occur round about the second Zoe of Pentecost on Elul-5 or the late first Zoe of Pentecost on Elul-6. We're actually going for Elul-4 to 7, 2021, which is Saturday August the 14th to Wednesday August the 18th. We're predicting both fire signs, which are an attack producing a mushroom cloud over the Hudson in Manhattan, and another attack producing a mushroom cloud over the Thames round about Dartford, east of London. The simplest, well, we have to see these attacks from the ark, because the scripture says in Acts 2, Peter quoting Joel 2, you will see signs on the earth below and in the heavens above, which means that you're going to be, the earth will be below you when you see the signs, which means you're above the earth, which means you're in the ark. And it could mean you're in a helicopter or an aeroplane, I suppose, but it applies to everybody. It applies to not just, so we'd have to have like all the faithful Christians in a helicopter, which is a bit unlikely, or an aeroplane, especially with the present travel restrictions. So we know we're going to be raptured into the ark to see it. And also in 1 Kings 18, Elijah says to his attendant, which is the balance of the church basically, which is boy, is the literal Hebrew, ones who he's baptized so as to become his sons by covenant, his boy generally. Go up, look in the direction of the sea. So go up into the ark is one interpretation of that. So if we can find the date of the rapture, we've probably got the date of the fire sign. Certainly the rapture must precede the fire sign. And you know the date of the rapture from Ezekiel chapter 8 verse 1, which says that on the 5th day of the 6th month, Ezekiel was sitting in his house and the older men were sitting before him, and the hand of Jehovah fell on him, which is him getting the gifts of the Spirit. And then this man appears with all sorts of paraphernalia on him, and he puts out his hand and takes him by a tuft of hair to between the earth and the heavens, so that the heavens is above and the earth is below, just as in Acts chapter 2. And that's the ark, that's mid-heaven of Revelation 19. So that's the rapture, and it happens on the 5th of Elul, which is when we now have the second fire sign occurring. So that's a very simple proof. A more complicated but possibly more convincing proof is the sentence count of the description of the contest proposed by Elijah in 1 Kings 18 verses 22 to 24, where he says to everybody, gather around, listen to me. I alone am a prophet, have been left as a prophet of Jehovah, whereas the prophets of Baal are 450 men. So there is a comparison between 1 and 450, result 450 times. And he says, let them give us 2 bulls, and let them choose 1 bull, and let them cut it up, divide it, and let them put it on woods, and let them not set fire to it. And I, for my part, will choose a bull, which will be the other bull, and prepare it and put it on woods and not set fire to it. And the God who answers by fire is the true God. And all the people said, what a great idea that is. Now, when you count that up, without getting into specifics, there's a whole bunch of actions by the prophets of Baal, which are all multiplied by 450 because there are 450 of them. And there's a whole bunch of actions by Elijah, which are all multiplied by 1 because there's only 1 of him. So the total amount would be X times 450 plus Y, basically. Now, the advantage of that is that 13 times 450 takes you from the beginning of the prophets of Baal, which was the start of the contest, which was when the Watchtower became a false church, which was 2005 ER14, to 13 times 450, which is 13 times 1¼ years, which is 16¼ years, takes you to 2021 AB14, which is 21 days before AB5 and 22 days before AB6. And the great advantage of a count, which is an equal number of 450s plus a few odds and sods, is that it can't be 14 times 450 because that would take you past the end of Adam. They've been, the whole system ends. Adam, the last day that Adam was alive is 2022 AB14, which is a year after the 13 times 450, after the 16 1/4 years after ER14 2005. So, you know, you can't go another 3 months after that. So it has to be the 13 times 450. I mean, it hasn't happened yet, so it must be at least 13, and it cannot be 14. I mean, that's the big advantage of having a big number like 450 in the count. And then you've got to add on however many you can get from Elijah choosing a bull, dividing it, and not setting fire to it, placing it upon woods. Now he chooses the bull, the other, and we take that to mean 2 times, because it's a bull which is distinct from some other bull, which makes it an other bull. So anyway, you work it all out, and without getting into the technicalities of it, we got it to 22, I think, which takes you to Elul 6, which is the absolute end of the contest. So that's the third fire sign, we think. I mean, we've gone for Elul 4 to 7 because my counting isn't 100% accurate. But it doesn't really matter if it's not 100% accurate here. It's going to be Elul 4 or 5 plus or minus 2 or 3 days, because that's the accuracy of my brilliant counting capability. And you can deduce that from 1 Kings 18. The 450s takes you to Ab 14, and then there's about 20, 22 after that, taking you to Elul 5, 6. So there's another proof. And here's the most astonishing proof of them all. It says in Luke 12, 54 to 56, it says, when you see a cloud rising upon west, you say there's going to be a downpour. That's because Jesus is talking to Israelites, and west of Israel is the Mediterranean. When a cloud comes from the sea, it's going to be rain. He then says, and when you, well, I think there's no there's a verb, but when you, a south wind, maybe it's sea, I don't know, a south wind, I think it's when you see a south wind, but it doesn't use the word blowing, you say a heat wave will occur, and so it turns out. And that's because the south wind from Israel would be from Saudi Arabia, and you know that's hot. So if there's wind coming from the south, it's going to be a heat wave, and if there's a cloud coming from the west, with wind from the west I guess, there's going to be rain. And what that is the parable of first century Israeli weather forecasting, which hopefully was slightly more accurate than the garbage we get today from useless Navier-Stokes solvers. Anyway, that was the literal meaning. But what actually Jesus says is, you say there'll be a downpour, and it turns out. And you say there'll be a heat wave, and it turns out like that. So there's 2 fulfillments. There's what you say, the recital, you say there'll be a heat wave, and then Jesus says, and there is. So there's the recital plus the fulfillment, recital plus fulfillment. So there's 2 greater meanings, one for the recital and one for the fulfillment, of the same thing. And there's a cloud in the west, and there's a wind from the south, or actually just the south wind. It could be from or to the south. I mean, it's from the south in the literal meaning, but the scripture isn't that precise. It could be either. Now, the first century fulfillment of this was the very, very famous explosion of Mount Vesuvius, which covered Pompeii in ash, and which incinerated, while standing in their shoes, everybody in Pompeii, just like a nuclear bomb would do today, because of the pyroclastic flow from the volcano, which had a 32-kilometre plume, according to volcanocafe.com, which is really cool. I suggest you go there. It also shows that the volcano, when it erupted, the wind was southerly, because basically Pompeii, actually not southerly, it was from the north, but it blew over to the south, because Pompeii was south and slightly east of Vesuvius. So what happened in the fulfillment in the first century was that there was a volcanic explosion on Mount Vesuvius, and that explosion occurred at 26, and it carried on for 8 days until, or 27, and carried on until Elul 4, 5. South is a quarter from west, or 3/4, depending which way you go round. And compasses ignore whole revolutions. So years don't matter in this, it's months that matter. In fact, only quarters really matter. But anyway, that's when the original fulfillment was. It was between Ab 26, 27 and Elul 4, 5, and this is attested to by Pliny I think of Pliny the Younger and Pliny the Elder. And you know, there's loads of history of this. And now in the greater meaning, the cloud going up are the fire signs I've been attempting to predict. which would you believe occur now on LL4567, which is when, more or less, the original one occurred. And that's because it's a fulfillment of the same thing. In other words, Vesuvius exploding when it did was a prophecy for when the second and third fire signs would occur, which I haven't really understood for more than a decade of me looking at it. But it jumped out at us when we were looking at it on Friday in the meeting we had in the church. So Vesuvius is a wonderful confirmation of prophecy that the fire signs will indeed occur in the same 8 days that they occurred back in 79 AD. Not only that, but the heat wave that follows this time is 3 months after the fire signs. Fire signs in west, heat wave in the south, from the south, is a 3-month or 9-month difference in time. And if you go forwards 3 months from Elul, you end up in Chislev, Chislev. And Chislev is when the Great Tribulation occurs, which is a heat of nuclear bombs. It's also Chislev 28 when that starts. And Chislev 29 is when the lava flood begins, which is very Pompeii, Vesuvius-esque. And it's another heat wave, of course, from a lava flood. So what we learn from the Vesuvius eruption is that the fire signs occur LL45, and that the Great Tribulation and the lava flood, the greater flood of Noah, will occur in Chislev this year, which is fantastic. And what I love about it is the precision in the symbolism between the nuclear bombs of the Great Tribulation, which will produce huge mushroom clouds, and Mount Vesuvius, the volcano, which actually blew the top kilometre. A whole kilometre of height was blown off the top of that mountain. It was one serious explosion. And it made it this 32-kilometre plume, which is, you know, if ever there was a pillar of fire and cloud of Exodus 14-13, that's it. And then the people get vaporised just as they would with a nuclear bomb. So it's perfect symbolism and a wonderful confirmation of a terrible, horrific event. So those are the 3 proofs we've got. We've got Ezekiel 8:1, which says raptures LL5. We've got the sentence count of 1 Kings 18:22-24, which says the whole contest actually lasts for 13 times 450 plus 22, which is 5850 plus 22, which is 5872 days, from ER14 to LL6. And then we've got this incredible archetype of the Vesuvius eruption from 79 ABS 2627 to LL45. So those are the reasons. So avoid Dartford and the Thames around there, keep a 5-10 mile radius. It's not going to be nuclear. The Great Tribulation hasn't begun yet, so but don't get caught up in it. Between August the 14th and the 18th, please avoid the Dartford area by the Thames, east of London, and please avoid being too close to the Hudson in Manhattan. Thank you.